Hello, everybody. I'm back, and it's time for us to read more To Kill a Mockingbird. Maybe you're reading it on your own. Maybe you're listening as I am reading. Maybe you've gone somewhere else on YouTube to get the audio. However you do it is fine. But I want to make sure that you are doing it. If you are listening, or you want to listen, or you like it, I suggest you get the app on your phone, because that is going to allow you to just very easily plug it in and listen on your headphones and walk around and do whatever it is that you want to do. So no problem. When last we left, and we're going to be starting on chapter 14, page 180, we saw Boo Radley, and we learned all about the Radleys, and Aunt Alexandra moved in, and we know that Scout's dad, Atticus, is defending a man named Tom Robinson, who is accused of raping a white woman. And we're learning more about the South at that time, and about the racism at that time, about the prejudice. Prejudice is when you, I think, act on that racism. And also kind of learned about how Scout was and how she felt about everything that was going on. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Although we heard no more about the Finch family from Aunt Alexandra, we had plenty of the town. On Saturdays, armed with our nickels, when Jem permitted me to accompany him, he was now positively allergic to my presence when in public. We would squirm our way through sweating sidewalks, crowds, and sometimes hear, "There's his chillin'," or "Yonder's some Finches." Turning to face our accusers, we would see only a couple of fanniers stood in the enema bags in the Mayco drugstore window, or two dumpy countrywomen in straw hats sitting in a Hoover cart. They can go loose and rape up the countryside for all of them whose runs its county care, was one obscure observation we met head-on with a skinny gentleman when he passed us, and which reminded me that I had a question to ask Atticus. "What's rape?" I asked him that night. Atticus looked around from behind his paper. He was in his chair by the window, and as he grew older, Jem and I thought it generous to allow Atticus 30 minutes to himself after supper. He sighed and said rape was carnal knowledge of a female by force without consent. "Well, if that's all it is, why did Calpurnia dry me up when I asked her what it was?" Atticus looked pensive. "What's that again?" "Well, I asked Calpurnia, coming from church that day, what it was, and she said ask you, but I forgot to, and now I'm asking you." His paper was now in his lap. "Again, please," he said. I told him in detail about our trip to church with Calpurnia. Atticus seemed to enjoy it, but Aunt Alexandra, who was sitting in a corner quietly sewing, put down her embroidery and stared at us. "You all were coming back from Calpurnia's church that Sunday?" And Jem said, "Yes'm, she took us." I remembered something. "Yes'm, and she promised me I could come out to her house some afternoon. Atticus, I'll go next Sunday if it's all right. Can I? Cal said that she'd come and get me if you were off in the car." "You may not," Aunt Alexandra said it. I wheeled around, startled, and then turned back to Atticus in time to catch his swift glance at her. It was too late. I said, "I didn't ask you." For a big man, Atticus could get up and down from a chair faster than anyone I ever saw. He was on his feet. "Apologize to your aunt," he said. "I didn't ask her. I asked you." He turned his head and pinned me to the wall with his good eye, and his voice was deadly. "First, apologize to your aunt." "I'm sorry, Auntie," I muttered. "Now then," he said, "let's get this clear. You do as Calpurnia tells you. You do as I tell you. And as long as your aunt's in this house, you will do as she tells you. Understood?" I understood, pondering a while, and concluded that the only way I could retire with a share of dignity was to go to the bathroom, where I stayed long enough to make them think I had to go. Returning, I lingered in the hall to hear a fierce discussion going on in the living room. Through the door I could see Jim on the sofa with a football magazine in front of his face, his head turning as if its pages contained a live tennis match. "You've got to do something about her," Aunt Alexandra was saying. "You've let things go on too long now, Atticus, just too long." "I don't see any harm in letting her go out there. Cal look after her as well as she does here." Who was the her they were talking about? My heart sank. Me. I felt the starch walls of a pink cotton penitentiary closing in on me, and for the second time in my life, I thought of running away. Immediately. "Atticus, it is all right to be soft-hearted. You're an easy man, but you have a daughter to think of, a daughter who's growing up." "Well, that is what I am thinking of." "And don't try to get around it. You've got to face it sooner or later, and it might as well be tonight. We don't need her now." Atticus's voice was even. "Alexandra, Calpurnia's not leaving this house until she wants to. You may think otherwise, but I couldn't have got along without her all these years. She's a faithful member of this family, and you'll simply have to accept things the way they are. Besides, sister, I don't want you working your head off for us. You've no reason to that. We still have Calpurnia as much as we ever did." "But Atticus, besides, I don't think the children suffered one bit from having them brought her up. If anything, she's been harder than, in some ways, than a mother would have been. She's never let them get away with anything. She never indulged them the way some colored nurses do. She tried to bring them up according to her lights, and Cal's lights are pretty good. And another thing, the children love her." I breathed again. It wasn't me. It was only Calpurnia they were talking about. Revived, I entered the living room. Atticus had retreated behind his newspaper, and Aunt Alexandra was wearing her embroidery. Punk, punk, punk. Her needle broke the taut circle. She stopped and pulled the cloth tighter. Punk, punk, punk. She was furious. Jim got up and padded across the rug. He motioned me to follow. He led me to his room and closed the door. His face was grave. "We've been fussing, Scout." Jim and I fussed a great deal these days, but I'd never seen anyone quarrel with Atticus. It was not a comfortable sight. "Scout, try not to antagonize Auntie here." Atticus's remarks were still rankling, which made me miss the request in Jim's question. My feathers rose again. "You trying to tell me what to do?" "Nah, he's got a lot on his mind now, without us worrying him." "Like what?" Atticus didn't appear to have anything especially on his mind. "It's this Tom Robinson case that's worrying him to death." I said Atticus didn't worry about anything, and besides, the case never bothered us except once a week, and then it didn't last. "Well, that's because you can't hold something in your mind but a little while," Jim said. "It's different with grown folks. His maddening superiority was unbearable these days. He didn't want to do anything but read and go off by himself. And still, everything he read he passed along to me, but with this difference, formerly because he thought I'd like it, and now for my edification and instruction." "Gee, crawling over, Jim, who do you think you are?" "Now, I mean it, Scout. You antagonize Auntie, and I'll spank you." Well, with that, I was gone. "You damn Morphy, I'll grab you." He was sitting on the bed, and it was easy to grab him in front of his hair and land one in his mouth. He slapped me, and I tried another left, but put a punch in the stomach sent me sprawling on the floor. It nearly knocked the breath out of me, but it didn't matter because I knew he was fighting. He was fighting me back, and we were still equals. "Ain't so high and mighty now, are you?" I screamed, sailing in again. He was still on the bed, and I couldn't get a firm stance, so I threw myself at him as hard as I could, hitting and pulling and pinching and gouging. What had begun as a fist fight became a brawl, and we were struggling when Atticus separated us. "That's all," he said. "Both of you go to bed now." I said to Jim. He was being sent to bed at my bedtime. "Who started it, Atticus?" asked Atticus in resignation. "Jim did. He was trying to tell me what to do. I don't have to mind him now, do I?" Atticus smiled. "Well, let's leave it at this. You mind Jim whenever he can make you. Fair enough?" Aunt Alexandra was present but silent, and when she went down the hall with Atticus, I heard her say, "Just one of the things I have been telling you about," a phrase that united us again. Ours were adjacent room, and as I shut the door between me, Jim said, "Night, Scout." "Night," I muttered. I picked my way across the room to turn on the light. As I passed the bed, I stopped. I stepped on something warm, resilient, rather smooth. It was not quite like hard rubber, and I had the sensation that it was alive. I also heard it move. I switched on the light and I looked at the floor by the bed, but whatever I had stepped on was gone. I tapped on Jim's door. "What?" he said. "How does a snake feel?" "Sort of rough, cold, dusty. Why?" "I think there's one under my bed. Can you come look?" "Aren't you being funny?" Jim opened the door. He was in his pajama bottoms. I noticed, not without satisfaction, that the marks of my knuckle was still on his mouth. And when he saw I meant what I said, he said, "Well, if you think I'm going to put my face down to a snake, you've got another thing coming. Hold on a minute." He went to the kitchen and fetched the broom. "You better get on the bed," he said. "You reckon it's really one?" I asked. This wasn't an occasion. Our houses had no cellar. They were built on stone blocks a few feet above the ground, and the entry of reptiles was not unknown, but it was not commonplace. Mitch Rachel Haverford's excuse for a glass of neat whiskey every morning was that she never got over the fright of finding a rattler coiled in her bedroom closet, and on her washing when she went to hang up her negligee. Jem made a tentative swipe under the bed. I looked over the foot to see if a snake would come out. None did. Jem made a deeper swipe. "Do snakes grunt?" "It ain't a snake," Jem said. "It's somebody." Suddenly, a filthy brown package shot out from under the bed. Jem raised the broom and missed Dill's head by an inch when it appeared. "God Almighty!" Jem's voice was reverent. We watched Dill emerge by degrees. He was tight-fit. He stood up and eased his shoulders, turned his feet in their ankle sockets, rubbed the back of his neck, and his circulation restored. He said, "Hey!" Jem petitioned God again. I was speechless. "I'm about to perish," said Dill. "Got anything to eat?" In a dream, I went to the kitchen. I brought him back some milk and half a pan of cornbread left over from supper. Dill devoured it, chewing with his front teeth, as was his custom. I finally found my voice. "How'd you get here?" By an involved route. Refreshed by food, Dill recited his narrative. Having been bound in chains and left to die in the basement, there were basements in Meridian, hit by his new father, who disliked him and secretly kept alive on raw field peas by a passing farmer who heard his cries for help, the good man poked a bushel pod by pod through the ventilator. Dill worked himself free by pulling the chains from the wall, and still in wrist manacles, he wandered 2 miles out of Meridian, where he discovered a small animal show and was immediately engaged to wash the camel. He traveled with the show all over Mississippi until his infallible sense of direction told him he was in Abbott County, Alabama, just across the river from Macon. He walked the rest of the way. "How'd you get here?" asked Jim. He had taken $13 from his mother's purse, caught the 9 o'clock from Meridian, and got off at Macon Junction. He had walked 10 or 11 of the 14 miles to Macon off the highway in the scrub brush lest the authorities be seeking him, and had ridden the remainder of the way clinging to the backboard of a cotton wagon. He'd been under the bed for 2 hours, he thought, and he'd heard us in the dining room, and the clink of forks and plates nearly drove him crazy. He thought Jem and I would never go to bed. He'd considered emerging and helping me beat Jem, as Jem had grown far taller, but he knew Mr. Finch would break it up soon, so he thought it best to stay where he was. He was worn out, dirty beyond belief, and home. "They must not know you're here," said Jem. "We'd know if they were looking for you." "I think they're still searching all the picture shows in Meridian," Dill grinned. "You ought to let your mother know where you are," said Jem. "You ought to let her know you're here." Dill's eyes flickered at Jem, and Jem looked at the floor. And then he rose, and he broke the remaining code of our childhood. He went out of the room and down the hall. "Atticus," his voice was distinct, "can you come here a minute, sir?" Beneath its sweat-streaked dirt, Dale's face went white. He felt sick. Atticus was in the doorway. He came to the middle of the room, and he stood with his hands in his pocket, looking down at Dale. I finally found my voice. It's okay, Dale. When he wants you to know something, he tells you. Dale looked at me. I mean, it's all right, I said. You know he wouldn't bother you. You know you ain't scared of Atticus. I'm not scared, Dale muttered. Just hungry, I bet, Atticus. His voice had its usual pleasant dryness. Scout, you can do better than a pan of cold cornbread, can't we? You fill this fellow up. When I get back, we'll see what we can see. Mr. Finch, don't tell Aunt Rachel. Don't make me go back, please, sir. I'll run off again. Whoa, son, said Atticus. Nobody's about to make you go anywhere but to bed pretty soon. I'm just going to go over to tell Miss Rachel that you're here and ask her if you could spend the night with us. You'd like that, wouldn't you? And for goodness sakes, put some of the county back where it belongs. The soil erosion's bad enough as it is. Dale stared at my father's retreating figure. He's trying to be funny, I said. He means take a bath. See there, I told you he wouldn't bother you. Jim was standing in the corner of the room, looking like the traitor he was. Dale, I had to tell him, he said. You can't run 300 miles off without your mother knowing. And he left without a word. Dale ate and ate and ate. He hadn't eaten since last night. He used all his money for a ticket, boarded the train as he'd done many times, coolly chatting with the conductor, to whom Dale was a familiar sight. But he had not the nerve to invoke the rule on small children traveling a distance alone. If you've lost your money, the conductor will lend you enough for dinner, and your father will pay back at the end of the line. Dale made his way through the leftovers and was reaching for a can of pork and beans in the pantry when Miss Rachel's "Do Jesus" went off in the hall. He shivered like a rabbit. He bore the fortitude of "Wait till I get you home. Your folks are out of their mind worrying," was quite calm during "That's all the Harris in you coming out," and smiled at her, "Reckon you can stay one night," and returned the hug as at long last bestowed upon her. Atticus pushed up his glasses and rubbed his face. "Your father's tired," said Aunt Atticus, her first words in hours, it seemed. She'd been there, but I suppose struck dumb most of the time. "You children get to bed now." We left them in the dining room, Atticus still mopping his face. "From rape to riot to runways," we heard him chuckle. "I wonder what the next 2 hours will bring." Since things appeared to have worked out pretty well, Dill and I decided to be civil to Jim. Besides, Dill had to sleep with him, so we might as well speak to him. I put on my pajamas, I read for a while, and found myself suddenly unable to keep my eyes open. Dill and Jim were quiet, and when I turned off my reading lamp, there was no strip of light under the door to Jim's room. I must have slept a long time, for when I punched awake, the room was dim with light of the setting moon. "Move over, Scout." He thought I had to, I mumbled. "Don't stay mad with him." Dill got in bed beside me. "I ain't," he said. I just want to sleep with you. Are you wake up?" By this time I was, but lazy so. "Why'd you do it?" No answer. I said, "Why'd you run off? Was he really hateful like you said?" Didn't y'all build that boat like you wrote you were gonna?" "He just said we would. We never did." I raised up on my elbow, facing Dill's outline. "It's no reason to run off. They don't get around to doing what they say they're going to do half the time. That wasn't it. They just wasn't interested in me." "Well, that was the weirdest reason for flight I'd ever heard. How come?" "Well, they stayed gone all the time, and when they were home, even they'd go in a room by themselves." "Well, what they doing there?" "Nothing, just sitting and reading, but they didn't want me with them." I pushed the pillow to the headboard and sat up. "You know something? I was fixing to run off tonight because they all were. And you don't want them around you all the time, Dill." Dill breathed his patient breath, a half sigh. "Good night." Atticus is gone all day, and sometimes half the night, and often the legislator, and I don't know what. And you don't want 'em around all the time, Dill. You couldn't do anything if they were. Oh, that's not it. As Dill explained, I found myself wondering what life would be if Jem were different, even from what he was now. What I would do if Atticus did not feel the necessity of my presence, help, and advice. Why, he couldn't get along a day without me. Even Calpurnia couldn't get along unless I was there. They needed me. Dill, you ain't telling me right. Your folks couldn't do without you. They must be just mean to you. Tell you what to do about that. Dill's voice went on steadily in the darkness. The thing is, what I'm trying to say is they do get on a lot better without me. I can't help them any. They ain't mean. They buy me everything I want. But it's, now you've got it, now go play with it. You've got a room full of things. I got you that book, so go read it. Dill tried to deepen his voice. You're not a boy. Boys get out and play baseball with other boys. They don't hang around the house worrying about folks. Dill's voice was his own again. Oh, they ain't mean. They kiss you and hug you goodnight and good morning and goodbye, and they tell you they love you, Scout. Let's get us a baby. Where? Well, there was a man that Dill had heard who'd had a boat that he rowed across to a foggy island where all these babies were, and you could order one. That's a lie. Auntie says God drops them from the chimney. At least that's what I think she said. And for once, Auntie's diction had not been too clear. Well, that ain't so. You get babies from each other. But there's this man, too, and he has all these babies just waiting to wake up, and he breathes lives into them. And Dill was off again. Beautiful things floating around in his dreamy head. He could read 2 books to mile 1, but he preferred the magic of his own invention. He couldn't add, subtract faster than lightning, but he preferred his own twilight world, a world where babies slept, waiting to be gathered like morning lilies. He was slowly talking himself to sleep, talking me with him, but in the quietness of his foggy island, there rose the faded image of a gray house with sad doors. Dill? Why do you reckon Boo Radley never run off? Dill sighed a long sigh and he turned away from me. Maybe he doesn't have anywhere to run off to. And that's the end of chapter 14. Dill ran away, feeling like he is not needed or wanted. That's sad. Perhaps we could all relate to that in some way or another. And growing pains are happening at the Finch household as Aunt Alexandra thinks things should be a certain way, and Jem thinks things should be a certain way, and Scout, well, she pretty much wants things to just stay the way they are. Well, that, my friends, is the end of that chapter. Do not forget to take the quiz. And next up will be chapter 15.